Thank you so much. Yeah. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all. I'm Dr. Anjali Parasnis, Technical Coordinator of 2030 WRG, and happy to welcome you for this third webinar titled Holistic Wastewater Management, Integrating Planning, Reforms, and Financing. This is organized by 2030 WRG in collaboration with Israel Economic and Trade Mission, the World Business Council on Sustainable Development, the India-EU Water Partnership implemented by GIZ, and the Government of Maharashtra. With this webinar, we would be concluding our first series focusing on wastewater reuse in agriculture. As you all are aware, webinar 1 focused more on the planning perspectives and also shared insights from Israel. Webinar 2 discussed mainly about the technologies and also touched upon an important aspect of quality standards which are important for environment, health, regulatory framework and food safety. With this webinar 3, we will be deep diving into governance and financial frameworks related to wastewater reuse and applications in agriculture. Today is also an important day. We are commemorating the World Earth Day 2021 with a theme titled Restore Our Earth. It is focusing on natural processes, merging green technologies, and innovative thinking. Interestingly, the World Earth Day is celebrated in more than 190 countries. Jane Goodall, a famous primatologist, once said, and I quote, that whatever you do, it makes a difference. And you have to decide what kind of a difference you want to make, unquote. We are fortunate to organize this webinar on such an important occasion. Today, we are here to share our knowledge and experience, hoping to make the difference in the area of efficient and sustainable water management and reuse. There are some housekeeping rules which I would just like to very humbly remind everyone. Please keep your mics on mute and please post your questions and comments in the chat box. We would try to address those during the session. We also have set aside time for interactions at the end of panel discussions. Let me also take this opportunity to introduce our organization, 2030 Water Resources Groups, which is a unique public-private civil society collaboration hosted by the World Bank Group to drive action on water resource reform in water-stressed countries. After its formal inception in World Economic Forum in 2008, the group has evolved from the stages of ideation, demonstration, and now it is trying to get to the scale. Alongside global partners and the World Bank, 2030 Water Resources Group supports a mature and dynamic network of over 900 core partners across the world, which include private sector, academia, bilateral, and multilateral organizations. I would request you to visit our website for more details. 2030 Water Resources Group works on the ACT principle, which means analyze, convene, and transform. Through a multi-stakeholder approach, the group is reshaping water sector policies, business models, and financing instruments for amplifying the impact in several countries. Some of the priorities include transforming value chains, promoting circular economies, and building resilience. With this background, we are organizing today's workshop, which has all the aspects related to the priorities of the group. In Maharashtra, the MSP, that is a multi-stakeholder platform, it focuses on 4 work streams or thematic areas and 4 cross-cutting areas, which include water and livelihood security in rain-fed areas, command area water productivity, wastewater reuse and management, and industrial water use efficiency. Whereas the cross-cutting themes include mainstreaming gender in agriculture and water accounting, alternative financing, and disruptive technologies. Now, when we are talking about this webinar and 2 very important aspects related to it, which include governance and finance, we all know that for centuries, wastewater has been improperly used in agriculture, which has presented several risks to public health and also to the environment. And therefore, this is a global concern. There are 4 forces which drive the business case for treated wastewater in India. The first is the water demand is increasing. We all know that there is a projection that by 2030, India's water demand will exceed supply by 2 times, indicating severe water scarcity. Now, there are more than 820 million Indians living in 12 river basins who have per capita water availability close to or lower than 1000 cubic meters, which is the threshold. So, although we know that 50% of the population will be staying in cities, the water demand is going to increase. And circularity of resources would be the most logical solution to this problem. Moreover, treated wastewater can be a climate-proof alternative to freshwater supply for urban, industrial, and agricultural applications. The second very important thing that needs to be considered is processing of wastewater. So, as we know, the cities draw its fresh water from sources which are far away from the cities. The city uses this water and again generates wastewater, which needs to be released somewhere into the environment again, which gets released mostly into the peri-urban areas and the rural areas. But for processing this water, it needs a very big conveyance system, lot of infrastructure. The treatment requires very expensive technologies. And with the effect of all this, hardly 40% of urban wastewater and 60% of industrial water is getting processed. And when there is a demand and acute shortage of water, all these three sectors, the urban, industrial, and agriculture, they compete for its resources. So if there is a shortage in say urban areas, then of course there are some restrictions which are given to the industrial water use, and therefore the productivity can also go down. But if we have decentralized treatment units closer to these industries and also closer to the farm units, then maybe this water can be very effectively processed and this output can definitely be enhanced. Third, important thing is institutional mechanisms and conducive policy environment. Also, there are viability considerations like tariff competitiveness, technology options, quality of reclaimed water, and cost of conveyance. There are other factors like viability gap funding. When Mr. Bakshi was the chairman of MWRRA, he often used to emphasize on two facts. One is the viability gap funding and the differential tariff. And he always advised that we should have costing of wastewater much lower than the fresh water. So that only will promote its use in several different sectors. So this differential tariff again needs a special consideration, and especially when we are talking about agriculture, it needs definitely some a different set of criteria to be considered, because the farmers will not be able to pay as much as the industrialists can pay. Of course, in the first session, if you may recall, we had also called some farmers into our session, and they had indicated their willingness to pay for the treated wastewater. I think that is really a revolutionary step for a state like Maharashtra, and very encouraging to see that farmers are coming forward, which also indicates that there is market demand for wastewater and treated wastewater for agriculture. People are realizing the significance of having purer quality water, purer quality food. Ultimately, we are relying on agriculture sector for all our food, fodder, and feed needs. Keeping this in mind, we have to have a very good discussion today, and I'm very happy to say that we are having expert panelists coming from different countries and also from India. I welcome all the participants as well as the panelists for this webinar. And it is also my proud privilege to introduce my co-panelist of this introductory session, Ms. Birgit Vogel. She is a project manager, implementation support to the India-EU Water Partnership. Ms. Birgit Vogel has 20 years of extensive expertise in national and international river basin management and integrative water resources management. Since beginning of 2018, she is working for GIZ India as project manager of the India Water Partnership. Before that, she was head of the company RBM Solutions, River Basin Management, based in Vienna. Between 2002 and 2012, she was employed as RBM IWRM expert for national authorities component for water resources management, as well as key international river basin commissions. Her work focuses on the coordination of river basin management plans, for example, Danube River Basin, Tapi River Basin, and related strategic approaches. In this context, she is acting interface for knowledge exchange between policymakers and stakeholders in the water sector. I'm happy to invite Ms. Birgit Vogel, and I'm requesting her to say a few words. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you, Anjali, for this very detailed introduction. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, to all participants on behalf of the India-EU Water Partnership and GIZ. I will keep myself short and would just like to make some key statements, beginning with me flagging that I think We are all aware that we are globally facing times of an increasing water scarcity and also water quality issues. And there are a few issues that will become more crucial than ever before, like providing clean water to all, to use water in a sustainable way, to reuse water and treated wastewater, to enhance the quality and quantity status of all our water resources. And I would like to emphasize that water scarcity is not only an issue in India, but also in Europe. So over-abstraction is also a major cause in the EU for water stress. Of course, not all over Europe, but in several parts. And I would like to mention that at least 11% of the European population and 17% of its territory have been affected by water scarcity. And therefore, it has become essential to prevent long-term imbalances between the water demand, the water quality, and the water supply to ensure good water quality of water resources. I would like to say a little bit about the India-EU Water Partnership. In 2016, a memorandum of understanding between India and the EU has been signed on water cooperation, and that was really the basis for the IWP to establish. During the last year, so until the end of October, we went through the first implementation phase, achieving a lot of the deliverables and contributing to water resources and river basin management in India, and bringing in and merging EU experience. The phase 2 of the IWP has started in November, and it will tackle 4 key technical thematic work areas, namely this is river basin management, environmental flow assessment, irrigation and efficient water use, and one area is the safe reuse of treated wastewater. And together with our Indian partners, we did a lot of work in this area. In the first phase, developing a comparative assessment, we compared policies that are currently on the safe reuse of water, currently available in India and in EU, finding out, where do they show synergies, what aspects take we into account. And as a consequence of this, the Ministry of Jal Shakti and NMCG asked the IWP to support a comprehensive consultation process to develop a national policy on the safe reuse of treated wastewater. This policy document is really in its finalization stage, and we will further tackle this finalization in the phase 2 of the IWP, so that should happen soon. But we will also look at other items like the topic of business models and the safe reuse of treated wastewater from the policy aspect, but also from the implementation aspect. Before I'll hand over to Anjali again, I would like to say that, of course, when we speak about the safe reuse of treated water, the governance issues are crucially important. No matter if it's the reuse in urban areas or in rural areas, coordinated governance approaches are really essential to achieve holistic outcomes regarding this topic. In the end, I would like to thank the Water Resources Group to partner with us on this webinar, to which I really look very much forward to it. And I also would like to emphasize that I'm very pleased that we have 2 EU experts in the webinar today, contributing with their experience on the safe reuse of treated wastewater. So as said, I look forward to a fruitful webinar, and I hand over to you again, Anjali. Thank you for the time slot.
Thank you, Birgit. Thank you. And now I would like to invite the first moderator of our panel 1, Dr. Mahesh Patankar. I'm very happy to introduce Dr. Patankar to all. Dr. Patankar is Senior Advisor, Disruptive Technologies with the 2030 Water Resources Group. He supports teams in India, Bangladesh, Vietnam, and Mongolia on applications of DT and advanced computing techniques in water. He has been working in the environment and energy policy making and implementation space since 1991. He has worked in the sustainability field in several emerging economies and low-income countries, developing projects linked to resource efficiency. He has academic degrees in engineering and project financing with PhD research in clean technology transitions to his credit. He has published in peer-reviewed academic journals and has several research publications to his credit. Over to you, Mahesh, for the first panel session, and we are very happy and excited to hear different views from our esteemed participants. Yeah,
Thanks
panelists.
a lot. Yeah, thanks a lot, Anjali, and thanks a lot, Birgit. With this, I welcome all the participants to this webinar and also the panelists to the first session. So the first session, as Anjali mentioned, is all about governance and institutional landscape. And what we are doing here is we are bringing global insights into the entire governance and institutional space, and specifically we are going to deliberate a little bit on holistic integrated wastewater management plans. And this is a global perspective session. So we are really pleased to invite three eminent speakers. We have Mr. Neve Pinto. He is the head of Mekaret, the National Water Company of Israel and owner of Livnet Engineering Company. We have Dr. Peony Hammerstein. She is emeritus scientist working on human and environmental health attached to the International Water Management Institute, IMI. We also have Ms. Conchita Marcelo. She is associated with the Director General Water, Ministry of the Ecological Transition and Demographic Challenge in Spain. So the three speakers that we have here are bringing in their experiences and expertise working in several continents, and specifically we have a good mix of those expertise coming from Asia, Africa, as well as EU and Eastern Europe. So with that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce the three eminent speakers formally, and we will have presentations from them for about 7 to 8 minutes. Let me start with Mr. Neve Pinto, who is the head of Mekaret at the National Water Company of Israel and owner of Livnet Engineering Company. He holds more than 20 years experience in planning, operating, and managing national scale water systems in Israel and abroad. And he's pretty much also Indian in a way, as he spent over 4 years as a company in India managing state water master plans in Maharashtra, Marathwada region, and Punjab on behalf of Israel National Water Company Mekaret. So he really brings in a good mix of perspectives from Israel as well as India. The second speaker that we have here is Dr. Peony Hammerstein, as I mentioned. She's emeritus scientist with the International Water Management Institute, which is headquartered in Sri Lanka, and she brings in over 40 years of research and development experience. She has over 200 publications with around 100 peer-reviewed publications in this field. She is also a member of the roster of experts for the joint FAO and WHO expert meetings on foodborne antimicrobial resistance aspects related to water quality for food safety. She is also a member of the advisory committee of the Ramsar Regional Center in East Asia, focusing on wetland-related activities in the region. The third that we have today is Ms. Conchita Marcelo. As I mentioned earlier, she represents Director General Water, Ministry of the Ecological Transition and Demographic Challenges. She is a civil engineer by training from the Polytechnic University of Madrid, specializing in hydraulics and energy. Very interesting combination. To date, she has developed professional activity in the world of water. She has held various positions at SEDEX that include core modeling in the hydraulics laboratory, as well as coordination of the international cooperation. In 2013, she took over as the adjoint to the Deputy Director for Water Planning and Sustainable Use in Director General of Water, where she worked for the promotion of water reuse in EU and Spain and the hydrological planning. And since October 2019, she is part of the support unit of the Director General of Water, Ecological Transition and the Demographic Challenge, from which she still is involved in water reuse as a part of the promotion of the circular economy in the water field and the efficiency of the water use. She also coordinates all the international water affairs at the DG Water in Spain. We really, as you can see, have a very diverse set of experiences coming from the global perspective. And what we sort of would like to do during this panel is we'll have about 7 to 8 minutes of presentation from the three eminent speakers. After that, if we have some time left, what we'll do is we'll take we might take sort of 1 or 2 questions from the audience, and I encourage you to write all of your questions in a chat box, and we will at least try to take 2 to 3 questions during this session itself and leave rest for the formal Q&A session at the end of this webinar. With that introduction, may I invite Neve Pinto from Livnet Engineering Company. Neve, over to you. You have about 7 to 8 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for everyone who came to this webinar. A very, very important webinar. My input with regard to the wastewater management will be with relation to Israel institutional and kind of big scale view on the problem. I won't get too much technical on the water treatment process. I'll be more into the big picture kind of presentation. I've been working in Israel water sector for the last 15 years, and then 4 more years in India. And one of the important issues that I really want to highlight in this presentation, and what is very important that I want people to take from this presentation, is that the wastewater in Israel are treated as a resource like anything else. So, and we will get to it as we talk more about how you implement or make people use wasted water. Israel using education and water tariffing and using it very, very sensitively, we managed to integrated different water qualities. If it's brackish, effluent, wastewater, surface water, groundwater, and in the last 7-10 years, desalinated water, it's been managed to provide high quality water for industrial and domestic purposes, where low grade water given to the agricultural sector. And because of the water tariff structure, it comes now that the agriculture sector in Israel cries for low grade water and develop the product and the industry, the agricultural industry, to use a low grade water. And usually when the farmers come to Israel National Water Company, to Mekorot, asking for water, if they tell him that they have nothing but fresh water in his area, he usually will be upset, because he will know that he will have to pay a lot of money. So it came after many years of water tariffing and education that the agriculture asked the politics and asked the system itself to provide low-grade water, and this integrated approach is what is very crucial and important for sustainable water management. And this is to relate to what Mr. Bakshi was saying earlier. Israel is one of the most advanced states in the world when dealing with effluent reclamation water. And this is, from obvious reason, this is a desert state. And from the beginning, from the 50s, from 1950s, Israel understood that for her to survive, it must treat water and wastewater as actual resource. And what happened today is that basically you take the water and you use them and you resell it a couple of times. So basically in Israel, you sell fresh water to the urban area. We will talk about the Shavdan, which is the biggest treatment facility in Israel. So you provide fresh water to the urban area. They paying you money. Then after basically flushing it out, you take it, you treat it, and you use it, you sell it again to the farmer in a lowest price, obviously, and therefore this kind of closed economy that you managed to achieve help you to subsidize the facilities and the infrastructure needed for such a system. So as you can see now, we're talking about Shavdan, which is called the third line in Israel. You can see it here, the purple
Get the number
line.
and try your call again. Thank you.
And supplying 185 million cubic meter a year. This is, as you can see, this is the biggest metropolitan area in Israel. We're talking about something like 250 kilometers square, around 2.53 million people. This is small scale compared to Indian urban cities, but the methodological and the principles can be implemented everywhere. So you can see the black, blue, and eastern line, the red line, are all taking the wastewater from the urban area. This is Tel Aviv and satellites areas around Tel Aviv, urban areas, and all connected to the Shavdan facility, which reach the water. So this is the metro. This is basically a picture of Tel Aviv, and this is the Shavdan, which using a mechanical biological treatment plant. And again, the lectures after me will be more technical. I won't get too much technical into the actual process, but what is important.
Get the number and try your call again.
Understand
Thank you.
Is that the facility, instead of making many small ones, building the facilities outside the urban area in the 70s, managed to provide provide that all the urban area only use the pumping station to pump the sewage water into the facility, and from that, after doing the second treatment and then moving it to SAT treatment, to achieve the tertiary treatment, it's provided to the agricultural sector. So the Shavdan secondary treatment using activated sludge is what happened in the facility, after which the effluent recharge and recycling for unrestricted irrigation in SAT process, soil aquifer treatment. And the soil aquifer treatment, basically, if you can see here, this is where the water are entering the artificial recharge basins. The second level treatment water are being recharged to the aquifer and then pumped again to the agricultural sector. So this is basically is the process. You have, this is the recharge basin. Water are being recharged back to the aquifer and then being using the recovery well are pumped back to the agricultural sector. So if the Shavdan is in this area, this is where the biggest metropolitan area in Israel. So using, if you can see, the blue lines are the freshwater line and the purple line are the ones supplying, is the system supplying treated water to the agricultural sector, thereby making the blue line, the freshwater system, to supply fresh water for domestic and industry and relieve the pressure from the freshwater system.
To interrupt you, but if you could please wrap up the presentation in about a minute. Thank you.
Okay, so the outcome of such a system is that 30% of all Israel agricultural crops come from the Negev Desert, and as you can see, over time, the freshwater demand is decreasing dramatically, and effluent and brackish water is being increased year after year. 50% increase of effluent supply from 2010 till today. And this is the vision of the creator of the Ben-Gurion, the first prime minister who was the first prime minister of Israel. This was his vision, and that's it. That's basically my presentation. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer.
Sure, Neil, thanks a lot. I think this was really, really interesting presentation, and there's several takeaways. I'm just going to sort of park all the takeaways for our post-session, post-panel discussion Q&A. Thanks, Jeff. And with that, I'm going to request Dr. Peony Hammerstein to share her experiences in large-scale holistic wastewater management plans from the lens of governance and institutional landscapes. So, Peony, over to you. I hope you're able to share your screen here.
Thank you very much, Mahesh,
for
those kind words. And thank you very much for the WRG Maharashtra group for inviting me to speak about my experiences. Let me very quickly share my presentation. Can you all see?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Just 1 minute till I minimize my side. Yeah. So, what I would like today is to sort of out my experiences coming from India, from and also from Sri Lanka. Whenever I refer to some of the conceptual thinking, it comes from those experiences. So this whole matter, using wastewater and using it for agriculture. And this is a map. If you can see to the left, it would be Hyderabad city. And we mapped about 40 kilometers downstream. It's the river water, but as you know, this Musi River has become, had become and is now a river that is heavily polluted. So that is why it was marked in brown. And then we also saw some groundwater use. And then we also saw some mixed areas. And nobody really tell, what is the global sort of irrigated area with wastewater. So that was the sort of first questions we asked. And recently, because this information that is out there is not really accurate, a study was undertaken again by IMI and my colleagues and came up with this calculation that the global area of urban irrigated croplands was estimated at about 24 million hectares, with cropping intensity of about 1%. And the global area of urban rain-fed croplands found was approximately 44 million hectares. So I think there's a great need to understand where wastewater is being used and what are the what is the demand like in different sectors to understand how we can use wastewater in agriculture. Now, having sort of looked at that, we wanted to understand what the landscape might be like for the city of Hyderabad. We had a number of stakeholder consultations to understand what the water requirements would be like, looking at, indoor and outdoor potable and non-potable water, industrial cooling, peri-urban food production, landscaping. We realized that treated sort of water had so many different demands. Now, in the case of Hyderabad and the peri-urban areas, we know that there's a lot of cultivation going on, different kinds of cultivation. There's rice paddy, then there is, you also get vegetable cultivation, there's paragrass. So it's a mixed sort of, and the water quality that is required could be different. So this is something that one has to remember when you're providing wastewater, treated wastewater for agriculture, the requirements would be different. So food crops, non-food crops, that would be different. So we looked at, from where the water was coming. This is an old slide. I know that there must be newer sort of water for drinking water being brought to the city. We realized that there are many sort of sources, and the water is lifted from far off places. And 80% of that gets into the Musi River. And there are also treatment plants, but all the water that is treated goes back into the Musi River. So here is the situation for Hyderabad city. In other cities, the situation will be different. It's a pity that this treated water cannot be given to the farmers to grow their crops, because the system has not been sort of developed, and farmers are just directly using the water from the Musi River. So this is a sort of a schematic diagram we came up with. We felt that the municipal water coming from the treatment plants could be pumped back. We also felt that one could treat the wastewater, in wetlands. With the sort of calculation, if farmers had to have small wetlands within their sort of irrigated area, it would cost about Indian rupees 13,000 per year to maintain a small wetland for their own little crop. So things like this we talked about, but it was very difficult how to sort of finance this whole process. We brought the irrigation department, the agriculture department, the municipalities, the CPCB to ask this question, and there were different opinions. Some felt that the polluter has to pay. Irrigation department felt that we only supply the water. We are not interested in the quality of the water. The Department of Agriculture was interested in producing safe sort of food, but these sort of mechanisms were not in one place. So there's a great need to sort of unpack these different scenarios to fully understand how clean water or safe water can be given to farmers to produce food. Looking at this, I sort of put together some important points to consider if wastewater is to be used for agriculture. So the mindset has to change, and I think everybody talks about this, that wastewater has to be considered as a resource. Now, it's not only wastewater, but we have to remember the sludge that comes out of it at the end has also to be considered. So nobody thinks of wastewater as part of the water cycle. So if a holistic and integrated management system is to be thought of, all these functioning systems have to be considered. Now,
speak a little closer to the mic. Can you please speak a bit closer to the mic? Some participants
hear me now?
Here. Yes.
Is it here? Can you hear me better now? Okay. So generation, composition, collection and treatment. We have to include sludge in this thinking. Disposal and reuse. All of this have to be thought of in a sort of a business model context, and financing aspect has to be thought out. You cannot leave out components of the value chain, because different contexts will have different situations, and every aspect has to be considered. Now, whether one should have centralized systems and decentralized systems. If you take Hyderabad city, I know that there were many wastewater treatment plants, but sometimes they didn't work very well. And the decentralized systems work better that we saw elsewhere, like in Bangalore and sometimes in Chennai. Now, Chennai had a situation where the wastewater treatment plant was producing treated water, but they didn't have agriculture to give the water. So they also put the water back into the streams, and they were not being used. So this contextualization is very important. In the technology, our African experience is that a number of on-farm and off-farm techniques can be used. And you have to understand, of course, farmer behavior aspects, farmer perceptions before you sort of set out to think about technology. There are a lot of natural or built sort of systems, the treatment systems that one can think of. And most today are talking about nature-based solutions. And wetlands, I think, is becoming very, very popular. I know floating wetlands, space, a lot of it is being tested. One has to think of sustainability, of course. This again, one has to think of a business model context and look at the financing also. As I said before, one has to understand the demand for reuse, because just because you have it and you think that you can use it for agriculture, and if agriculture is not around, then this becomes a big problem. How do you transport this amount of water? So some innovative thinking has to go into this aspect as well. Now, in terms of planning, I think everyone is looking at the basin level planning, which is good, but sometimes the basin level planning could be too big. So you can take, for instance, a city sort of landscape, and look at how the reuse can be thought of from a city landscape and look at planning. So each area has to think of its own way of dealing with this. Now, monitoring and evaluation is a very important aspect because you can set up something, and if you don't do that, the monitoring and evaluation, it does not sort of sustain itself. This is an important component to think of. And then policies and regulations. We know international and local regulations there are there. WHO has guidelines, FAO has guidelines, EPA has guidelines, and but these have to be contextualized and come up. One has to come up with something that suits the country. And then institutions and governance. I think this is where a lot of people have issues. The sort of sectoral involvement, how can governance be done holistically? And a lot of stakeholder consultations have to be done. And this is one of the most difficult parts, I think, in this whole reuse in agriculture, because the thinking and the mindset can be very, very different. Then capacity building is very important. I think thinking changes and the technology changes, and how to manage people and how to manage farmers, and along the value chain, the capacity building component is also very, very important. And then finally, I think we have to have a repository, and now there is a repository. You all must have heard about the Aquastat that FAO is managing, and IMI is now responsible for updating this, and we encourage people to give whatever data that people collect from cities, so that we can have a better understanding of how to handle this wastewater that is being generated and use it for agriculture. And my final slide is about looking ahead. So, to all those who are looking at reuse for water. So if water resources management, develop this initiative as part of basic planning, which is good. Sometimes it can be done. And one can unpack that to suit certain regions where wastewater can be. Sorry, okay. Changing the mindset. Now we're talking about wastewater treatment plants. I think in the future we should be talking about water resource recovery facilities. So therefore, realizing the wastewater's value. Then unpack the different components of wastewater reuse value chain. Explore and support the development of innovative financing and sustainable business models in this sector. Now, again, IMI has done a lot of business models looking at how to manage fecal sludge. And there's a lot of information available, which is in the web and can be utilized. So different countries will have to look at their sort of situation and see how best to look at this wastewater reuse for agriculture. And then finally, to implement the necessary policy, institutional and regulatory frameworks to promote this paradigm shift. And a lot of stakeholders have to come together in order to make this a reality. And these can be from simple to start off with to complex, because if you have complex ones to start off with, no one will want to accept it. So start simple and can answer complex steps as we learn from our experiences. So I think that's kind of summarizes what I have to share. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Peony. I think it was really interesting take on context-specific setup of problem definitions, planning, institutions, finance, training, and also measurement and verification. And you talk a lot also about the knowledge that needs to be created and disseminated for other countries and other contexts to take it up. So thanks a lot for this very elaborate discourse on the wastewater use and planning. With that, we now move to the third and the final speaker of this particular session, Ms. Conchita Cielo from Spain. Conchita, would you like to share your screen and take off?
Yes, hello. Can you hear me? Can you see the presentation?
I can hear you. And one request, as you are the last speaker of the session, would request you to stick to around 7 minutes so that we can hand it over to the finance panel on time. Thank you.
Yes, okay. Thank you very much for having looked at the Spanish water reuse management issues for this workshop. It is it is an honor to be here and share the panel with the colleagues who I think they've done very interesting presentations. I will go with my presentation first by looking at three main aspects. First of all, the main drivers for water reuse from the point of view of our national situation, and then I will go some overall issue on regional European Union drivers. Also, I will go to how we integrate water reuse, the legal framework, and in particular, water reuse is part of our river basin management plans in Spain. They are fully integrated as part of the planning issue. And then I will go some ideas for promoting water reuse given the arena in which we move in Spain in the Europe as part of the European Union and the barriers we have. So so what made us reuse in Spain? Why do we reuse in Spain? Well, now in this picture you see a map of my country, the peninsula, the part of the Spanish Iberian Peninsula, and the Balearic and Canary Islands. And a part of the country is a Mediterranean country, and the south and eastern part of the country has a very clear Mediterranean hydrological pattern. So in Spain, water authorities are very used, and people is used to be managed and be managed in water scarcity under scarce water resources because of high use of water for agriculture. So we are a country with some 506,000 kilometers squared, with an irrigated area of some more of 3.5 million of hectares, mainly concentrated in the southeastern Spain, and with a mean average population of some more than 46 million people. But we have tourism, and I hope that it will be still let's see next feature. Let's hope in the next feature. So we have a tourism of some 18 million people per year. We've got these demands, the irrigation and tourism, very highly concentrated in the same areas in the Mediterranean area and in the islands, and also with a very marked seasonality, and the seasonality of tourism and irrigation are the same. They have the same pattern. So the mean average use of water for agriculture is 80% of the water available for use in Spain. So we have to manage in these situations, and that's why we have been reusing for a long time, more or less informally. So now this made that a reuse would be part of our planning process, the water resources management process. And now, since the 2000 directive, also known as Water Framework Directive, water reuse is part of the European framework. So, giving an overview of the regional issues from the policy work, some chronology is that we had a directive concerning urban wastewater treatment, in which well reuse is just mentioned in Article 12 of that directive, actually, which it was mentioned that treated wastewater shall be reused whenever appropriate. End of the history. So there was no obligation of reporting on water reuse, and there was not much attention to water reuse really by the European people. So we managed in this situation as a country, and that's it. Now it came in 2000, the Water Framework Directive, by which river basin management plans had to be delivered in cycles of 6 years. And reuse was better approached in the sense that it was considered a supplementary measure that allows gaining the efficiency of water reuse. Under this directive, there was no requirement of reporting of water reuse, mainly because this directive puts on the top of the goal of the directive to achieve environmental good status of all water bodies and achieve a highly environmental standards. So what happened? What happened is that when the European Commission reviewed the implementation of this directive in the report of 2012, they were taken into account that the water quantity issues were not well addressed under the directive implementation, and they started to work more in depth in looking at how to improve water efficiency in European waters and how to enable policies in order to make a more efficient use of waters in the whole of Europe. So that's when water scarcity and drought issues came into the European arena in much more public way, say this way. And more recently, the European Strategy for Circular Economy already included a measure for legislating on water reuse. So this has seen the end of this process with the new regulation of water reuse, which was passed in 2020, last year in 2020, which is the Regulation 741. Which establishes minimum requirements for water reuse, and the regulation addresses but not limits to agricultural use. And now the new plan for circular economy of the European Union includes water efficiency beyond the arena of water reuse. In Spain, what do we have? We had an old, in the sense of it is no longer in force, and the old Water Act of 1988, in which all the water were declared public, and included the water reuse because the government had to establish the condition for water reuse. Nothing really happened in a formal way, but it was really more or less informally happening in basins. But the current Water Act of 2001 inherited this principle, and then in 2007, the government established the legal requirements for developing the river basin management plans. So with the river basin management plan decree, the regulation on how to include water reuse in the plans is made, and it is part of the water balance. We have to make allocation of water uses, no matter their origin. So it's really a promotion and a visibilization of water reused volumes as a pool of waters in the river basin, at the river basin scale. And now in 2006 and 2007 as well, at the end of the year, by Royal Decree 1620, the government set a framework for water reuse, establishing quality requirements for 5 uses. It established a procedure of permitting, and very important, it put on the shoulders of the users the responsibilities of reusing. This means the cost of reusing. What happened then? That very informal reuse have been done, and the cost of the reuse installations has not really paid by farmers. And this is something that has been put in very clearly on the table on the discussions of the Regulation 2020 in Spain, by which, when it was approved, oversees the quality requirements of our regulation for agriculture, and the new regulation establishes a new procedure for permitting. It establishes the requirement of developing risk management plans in reuse systems, and more importantly for us, it establishes an arena for making shared responsibilities. Very quickly, this is a snapshot on how the balances we have to develop for organizing water resources in river basin districts, in which we have a pool of water resources, a pool of uses. We have to balance them and take into account that the environmental objectives of the water bodies are in compliance with the ecological and chemical standards. As an example of the management in a river basin, I will show you, for example, the case of the Júcar River Basin. The Júcar River Basin district is the place in which the city of Valencia, the cradle of paellas, is set, and this is one of the river district basins with a very mix of historical and really new irrigation systems, and we've got a mix of very traditional system and very modern systems. I have to say that when reusing water in Spain has been called, in particular the Júcar, and very in particular Andalusia and Murcia are considered as the big exporting market to Europe of orchards and fruits and vegetables, and we export to the whole of Europe and in many countries abroad of Europe, and there had not been any single incident related to water reuse because of this market. So as an example, in the Júcar River Basin, what do we have? It's an example of all the issue in Spain, a mixture of sources, a mosaic of crops, and different irrigation systems. This is the reality. So water reuse is one more resource of the pool of groundwater, surface water, and mixed. If you see in this picture, in the map of the left, the colored map, in blue you see the groundwater systems or the areas irrigated with groundwater. In green, the areas irrigated with surface water, and in yellow, the areas irrigated with a mix. Then in the left, we see the areas which uses reused water as part of the pool. The mean percentage of water reused or reclaimed water in these areas are 11%. So this is the arena.
Yeah. Conchita, may I request you to please close your talk in less than a minute, please, because we are really running late. Thank you.
Yes, I know, but it's been late for the other panelists as well, but I just show. And this is the table in which there is a comparison of water qualities. The new requirements had more stringent water qualities for agricultural uses than the standard we had in Spain, more or less in one logarithmic unit for E. coli in most of the applications. And I will be closing by an example of how the water reuse system is understood in this new regulation, which is the system comes from the operator of the wastewater treatment plant, which delivers water to a reused water operator. And this has to comply with the quality requirements, which will be delivered to the users, who have to ensure that the water is safe up to the point of use according to the health regulations. So what happens in Spain is now that with this framework, we are trying to promote water use by putting the cost or sharing the cost between the polluter pays, the urban use, and the users. And we have to make a balance between water requirements for being reused in order to the farmer can pay a part of the of the really needed reclamation cost. From the circular point of view, now in Spain, we are promoting reuse as part of the circular economy plans. We've got a plan which establishes a target of increase of efficiency in water use of 10% up to 2030. And part of this increase of efficiency, we've got policy enablers in order to promote water reuse by facilitating all the users to pay for the cost of water reuse. That's all. Thank you for the attention.
Thanks a lot, Conchita. And I'm going to quickly summarize the session deliberations. We had very sort of good insights on the importance of setting the policies, understanding the local context, and also very interesting to see from Conchita's presentation how a national level policy and the EU-wide policy is sort of integrated after a gap of a few years. And that's very interesting. And I think the entire resilience to the economic activity, as Spain described, the agriculture consumes 80% of water, the fresh water. I think some of those aspects are really interesting. Peony did talk about the importance of finance, and I think the initial presentation from Niv also highlighted the importance of how do you really set a tariff on the wastewater that gets recycled back into the economy. So there are several aspects that were sort of shared by our three eminent speakers, and apologies to you speakers for curtailing your presentations. I'm sure we will circulate these presentations to the participants, and they and also facilitate any kind of common bilateral dialogue. With that, I thank all of you speakers and hand it over to Anjali to set up the next panel related to finance. Thanks a lot. Anjali?
Thank you so much, Mahesh, and thank you so much for the panelists of the first session for such insightful experiences that you have shared, which have enriched our knowledge. And there are also some few questions I see in the chat box, and which will take up the questions later after the second panel discussion is over. So I'm very happy now to introduce Kavita Sachwani to you. She will be moderating the second panel session. So Kavita is currently part of the global leadership team and leads and manages the secretariat of the Maharashtra Water Multi-Stakeholder Platform of 2030 WRG towards creating the wider political economic conditions and momentum for change in water reform. She is a public policy, financial services and development sector professional with over 2 decades of experience spanning policy advocacy and program management in public health, financial inclusion, financial services, and now water resources management. She is passionately driving the need for channelizing innovative financing into the water sector. So I welcome Kavita and hand over the platform to her. Kavita, over to you for second panel discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Anjali. Thank you. Thank you so much, Anjali. I'm having some network issues today. So if I drop off, I'll probably join back. I've just connected through my hotspot right now. So I'm just keeping my camera off. But thank you so much for that introduction, and hello, everyone. And hope it's a good evening or a good morning for you all. This virus is really forcing us to mend our ways for the earth to celebrate, and hope we find our connection with the earth and be guided by more responsible ways by nature as we commemorate Earth Day with hope and gratitude. Thank you so much for joining us today as we honor this special day by asserting the need to move from a linear model of water use to a circular one. And as Anjali said, let's do what we can do to make a difference. So Anjali, Mahesh, Birgit, Niv, Peony and Conchita, that was such an interesting discussion with some great insights into governance aspects of wastewater reuse in Spain, Sri Lanka and Israel using multi-stakeholder approaches. We now move to another interesting discussion on leveraging innovative financing for the wastewater reuse in the context of agriculture, and how, again, using a multi-stakeholder approach, we can work on making it ROI attractive and attract private capital into the sector. The principles of a circular water economy are also very closely linked with the principles of valuing water, and I think that's something we really need to weave into our planning on an ongoing basis. the economic argument for water has been traditionally weak on account of its nature as a public good and the tragedy of the commons, which I think has led to a disregard for sustainability. Even where investment in water security makes economic sense, the economic argument has not translated into a compelling financial case for investment. That has led to current levels of investment being suboptimal relative to the economic, social, and environmental benefits from further reductions of water risks. So financing is needed to not only pay for loss and damage, but also building resilience and promoting a circular economy, like I said. Large long-term investments are required in resilient, climate-smart infrastructure. And as we all know, climate change is putting further pressure on water utilities. So we need faster and better ways to make our utilities carbon neutral and create an enabling environment to get these utilities to channelize the treated water for irrigation and other non-potable purposes. There is also a need to channelize available capital into water and enhance the risk-return profiles of investments and generate desired back-end impact for such investments for the private sector. Innovation in technologies and in business models can make water more attractive for investors. And this does require appropriation of inter-institutional spaces to mobilize resources to invest in innovative approaches to investments in water. The financing picture would obviously vary across regions and across thematic areas, but it definitely requires an ecosystem that moves beyond traditional bank financing and beyond subsidy-driven models. It requires an integrated approach through bringing better governance and efficiencies leading to creditworthiness at one level and complementing this enabling ecosystem with alternative financing mechanisms at another. So we have a very illustrious panel for this session with a mix of the private sector and the government and the complementary roles that they need to continue to play in scaling this important concept. I will introduce them in a while. So thank you, Vimla, Manuel, and Namita, and for taking time out to join us for this discussion. And we really look forward to your insights and experiences on this important aspect of leveraging finance to reimagine reuse of treated wastewater in agriculture at scale. Unfortunately, Ms. D. Tara, Joint Secretary, Ministry of Housing and Urban Development, Government of India, could not make it due to a medical emergency, and we do hope things get back in control for her. So we will start the discussion with Ms. R. Vimla, Mission Director for the Jal Jeevan Mission, Government of Maharashtra. It's my very proud privilege to introduce her to you. Vimla is a seasoned public administrator with close to 3 decades of experience in various departments of the government and has contributed significantly to public welfare schemes. As the CEO of the Maharashtra State Livelihoods Mission, she was instrumental in creating close to 5 lakh self-help groups, associating with over 50 lakh families and generating sustainable livelihoods for over 18 lakh households. Her focus has been on working in cognizance with the SDGs, specifically health, nutrition, and sanitation. Currently working as the Mission Director, Jal Jeevan Mission, the Water Supply and Sanitation Department, Government of Maharashtra. She is spearheading the Government of India's ambitious program of Har Ghar Jal for ensuring pure drinking water in rural homes. Thank you again, Ms. Vimla, for joining us this evening. So the Jal Jeevan Mission is a flagship scheme of the Government of India, which seeks not only to not only provide functional household tap connections, but also to promote the holistic management of local water resources, and also addresses the need to sustain water sources with conservation and reuse measures, which are mandatory to the scheme design. Can you share with us some ways in which grey water reuse can be operationalized? Vimla?
Yeah, thank you, Kavita. It's a pleasure to be part of this discussion on the WRG group. Jal Jeevan Mission, of course, is a very ambitious program of the Government of India with 50% partnership from the central and 50% partnership from the state government. Any program which is, initialized and introduced at any level, whether at the central government or the state government level, there is always a lot of pressure to ensure that it is reaching out to the people. So administration in the olden days used to be very regulatory. We were always, depending on how you really, the public policy making was very important, but now implementation, as it is becoming more and more important, we find that ways and means are woven into the whole fabric of policy making to ensure that people are participating in the program. So Jal Jeevan Mission is also not different in any of that. So whenever this program which has been made, it has been designed in such a way that we will reach to the homes of the people. Delivery is the most important. So it's not that, that there are no programs, infrastructure was not there for water. It was always a infrastructure oriented program previously. Now we are concentrating on the delivery mechanism. And that is why the tap connection becomes important. And along with that, the JJM guidelines which are there, they're very specifically mentioned about grey water management also, which is a very important part of the program. So grey water management has been woven into this fabric in the sense that they're saying that it should be managed at the village level. Even the planning for JJM, if you see, it begins with the village level planning, because what the villagers want, what do they desire for their village to have, how they're going to have the water is something which they really have emphasized on, that the plan has to be bottom up, basically.
Right.
So even grey water, if you see, as you said, that 80% of all this water is used normally by the women. They are the ones who really, channelize all the water, the domestic water, basically, whether it is for bathing, washing the utensils. These are the things which are normally you really work on. And I was really, fortunate to work in MSRLM, where we tried this very interesting model of using grey water for kitchen gardens. It has been a very successful model. We tried in about 10,000 kitchen gardens, which were in all over the state, almost practiced by more than about 2 lakh households. So I feel that if the people are channelized, if they get trained into this kind of activity, they can very well do it. So we had a very interesting partnership with water.org also in my previous work which I did. And there because sanitation, I had observed at that time that people, Mr. Mahajan also has joined here today. So we find that people, 12,000 rupees sometimes is not enough to make the toilet. Women and people are also very interested. They're becoming much more, advanced in thinking. They want to have a bathroom attached to it sometimes. They want to have a better toilet. So we had arranged for loans from the banks for them. Also, we had woven it in such a way that SHGs could take loan. So that model I have already seen, that which is existing for community management. And I feel that in Jal Jeevan Mission also, though I have, my term has about 7-8 months now, and it takes very time to a lot of time to have social policies framed, because it's a convergence. You have to have different departments. But I always believe that you can, if you're having a door open, and if you're inside the door and you're willing to open that door, 10 things can happen. And so I look forward to having this plan, I think so. Yeah. So it will take a little time, definitely, but it will materialize, I think.
Sure. And just related to a question related to Jal Jeevan Mission. So we are implementing, or Maharashtra is implementing JJM with Government of India and Government of Maharashtra funds. And we understand the scheme itself works on a pay for results framework to reward higher level outcomes and sustainability. So how do we think we can leverage this in Maharashtra, especially from a reuse and recycling wastewater perspective, and how can the mission be made more sustainable in financial terms, picking on the example that you gave from water.org? And do you think there is a role for the private sector as well in this? And if we can integrate maybe some elements of, say, viability gap funding in a program like this?
Yes, so I have recently started the discussions with a couple of people. Definitely, we want to explore this model, because you find that even government has started using SCADA, or they want to have IoT-based management of the water which is being used to the last mile delivery. So unless we have private partners, because in government many times you find that having this kind of technology to understand and support becomes difficult. So I'd be really happy if you can have some hybrid annuity model, which is there already. We have seen in the Namami project or any other project. So I'm looking forward.
Absolutely.
And I'm keeping my eyes and ears open as a facilitator, because that is how I look at my role, in any program. So, and I'm this is probably a message to all the private partners who are there today, that please come in for a discussion. We'll be happy to take it forward.
Lovely. No, that's indeed very heartening, because I think we would love to collaborate with the government of Maharashtra, and of course we're working with the government of India as well, and happy to take this discussion forward. Thank you so much, Vimla, for your very interesting insights into how we are driving Jal Jeevan Mission in Maharashtra, especially on the grey water reuse, and we'll connect separately with you and your team on this. Thank you so much. Now we now move on to Manuel Sapino. Hi, Manuel. Manuel is the CEO of the Energy and Water Agency within Malta's Ministry for Energy, Enterprise and Sustainable Development. In this role, he coordinates a team of experts with responsibilities for the formulation, evaluation, monitoring, and implementation of national policies concerning the use of energy and water in a sustainable manner, and the formulation of plans to meet national and EU energy and water resources management targets. Manuel is a hydrologist with specific specialization in island and coastal hydrology. Manuel, thank you so much for your time and welcome once again to this webinar. And it would be lovely if you could share some of your experiences from Malta, specifically on how are finances being made available for wastewater treatment projects. Manuel, over to you.
Thank you, and I would say, I believe a good afternoon to all. So I will share my screen and presentation.
Sure.
Manage to find it. So okay, is this one?
Are you fine, Manuel?
So,
yeah, okay.
yes, it's
Great.
coming
Yeah,
on.
yeah.
Now we'll do it full screen and we'll change the procedure.
Sure.
So next thing is settings.
Lovely. Yes, I think we can see the screen now.
You're seeing full screen? No, I think I should do.
Yeah, I think you have your next slide on mode as well. So
yeah. So
just
computer decided to start working slowly, but we managed to do everything. So now it should
sometimes
be okay.
it gets into a meditative mode.
Yeah. So I'll be speaking about Malta's water use program, but more from a financial perspective. So first introduce our use program and then how it was developed and how we apply, let's say how we this program is being financed. So first of all, what is our new water project? Our water reclamation project is called New Water Project, obviously, because it is producing an additional water resource. And first of all, let's keep also in mind that Malta is a very small country, so 360 square kilometers and around 500,000 people. So when you see the numbers, keep in mind that we're talking on a very, very small country. In fact, all the population of Malta is served by 3 urban wastewater treatment plants. So these wastewater treatment plants were intended to treat wastewater before it is discharged to the sea, also to protect coastal waters. And through the New Water program, we've developed 3 additional polishing plants in parallel with these treatment plants, with the potential to produce around 7 million cubic meters of high quality water intended for reuse in irrigation, landscaping, industry, and also or aquifer recharge. This 7 million cubic meters actually amounts to around 33% of all the irrigation water used in Malta. So it is a big project, although understandably, one has to see the number within the context of Malta's size. The new water process, the new water treatment envisages 4 barriers. So the first barrier is a barrier which treats the sewage, so the conventional wastewater treatment process. Then it moves towards an ultrafiltration unit, a low pressure reverse osmosis, and advanced oxidation. We were required to introduce this low pressure reverse osmosis because, being a coastal area, some of our sewers are below sea level, and we have seawater infiltrating in the sewers wherever there are inconsistencies in the network. Obviously, wastewater is not under pressure, and therefore, whenever there's a break, a crack in the sewer network, and it is below sea level, we have seawater going into the sewers, and that increases salinity. And we had to introduce low pressure desalination to reduce salinity, because sometimes we had salinities even up to 15,000 microsiemens, and that is not water which is good for irrigation. The good side to it is that with low pressure RO, the quality of the effluent, the quality of the treated water is extremely high, is extremely good. Within this context, this water is being provided for agriculture, and to ensure cost recovery, we have developed a rising block tariff mechanism, and this rising block tariff mechanism is intended to incentivize the efficient use of this reclaimed water. The tariffs apply to both the agricultural sector and the industrial sector. In the agricultural sector, the tariffs apply on a holding unit basis. Therefore, a large farm would be of a number of holding units, whereas a small farm would be just one holding unit. And therefore, the tariff applies in the agricultural sector to multiples of the volume of water according to the size of the holding unit. The first tariff band is priced at 20 euro cents per cubic meter. However, to incentivize more the agricultural sector, this first tariff band has been suspended. So the first volume for the agricultural sector is at no cost. The second band goes up to 60 cents, the third band goes up to 80 cents. And the reason for this being that we're trying to incentivize farmers to invest in efficiency to stand within the first tariffication band. Also, the 20 cents when it comes to other users has been set when in comparison with alternative supply resources such as abstraction of deep groundwater or the supply of water by private suppliers, and the tariff is cheaper than the water supplied by alternative sources, and therefore this is an added incentive for people, for operators to move towards wastewater. What is important is that from an economic perspective, the inclusion of water reuse in the water management framework changes what we consider as conventional water services. So the supply of drinking water, the collection of drinking water, so the collection of sewage and the treatment of sewage and its disposal. That is the traditional function of water services. With water reuse, we're expanding this. So a water utility starts also producing water which can be used instead of other water resources, for example, in the case of agriculture, for irrigation and instead of groundwater. Therefore, the portfolio of water services offered by the utility becomes much broader. In fact, the effective consideration of water reuse therefore requires a broader economic framework. One does not need to look just at the financial aspects of water reuse when seeing how the system operates, but also needs to look at the economic benefit which reuse brings over to the country. And in this consideration, one needs to look at the resource benefits, because water reuse is being used instead of natural water resources. One has to look at the environmental benefits, because it is reducing the pressure on natural water resources. Other economic benefits which can be generated from the security of supply, which the agricultural sector has. So the agricultural sector would be facilitated to invest, and also social benefits by ensuring the wholesomeness of communities, agricultural communities. And therefore, these external benefits, these externalities related to water use need to be also taken into consideration when considering cost recovery and financing of such projects. Our financing model has been based on EU funding, so the development of the water reclamation facilities have been supported by two main EU funds, the Cohesion Fund. The Cohesion Fund invests in the infrastructure of member states, and also by the Agricultural Fund for Rural Development, which invests in the agricultural sector. However, the operational costs are part covered through user tariffs, and the rising block tariff mechanism gives rise that whilst the first volumes are at a lower price than the cost of the water, the higher parts are at a higher price than the actual cost of the water, and therefore the polluter, in this case, the inefficient user, is paying for the efficient user. So it's also an indirect application of the polluter pays principles. This is our financing model. However, one can look at alternative financing models, in particular through public-private partnerships, which was one of the aspects which we were considering when we were planning this this project. And as we all know, public-private partnerships include shared responsibilities, different levels of shared responsibilities between the public and the private sector. And let's say that the possibility of public-private partnership obviously comes much easier when tariffs are involved and when there is a cost recovery for the water itself. So therefore, the level of private entry, the level of private ownership of the scheme would definitely be guided by the amount of cost recovery which there is in the scheme. Obviously, we can start with government divesting the operation and government paying for the operation to a fully blown private operation where the private sector can recoup the costs and have a guided and effective product. On the whole, the inclusion of the private sector sometimes makes good for increased efficiencies, basically because then there's a bigger push for an operation according to market forces. This said, definitely one needs to balance between things. To close my presentation, I would say why water reuse, and one of the important aspects of water reuse is addressing competitivity. First of all, competitivity of the agricultural sector. So this means that the water has to be priced, the water has to be provided to the agricultural sector at competitive prices. And this is a very important aspect, that water reuse needs to be there to supplement the supply requirements of the agricultural sector, but to ensure that the agricultural sector remains competitive. But also one needs to look at the added benefits of including water reuse. So therefore, what added economic growth would there be in the agricultural sector by ensuring security of supply, by ensuring high quality water, which can lead farmers to develop more cost-effective crops. So one needs to look at not just the plus or minus pound, euro, dollar, plus or minus from financial terms. One needs also to look at the broader economic benefits which water use generates. And when it comes to government supporting such schemes, government must also take into consideration this unmonetized benefits coming up from water use. And these can be a significant reason for government support and for ensuring that instead, let's say, there is a justification for the support given indirectly to the agricultural sector. Thank you, and that's the close of my presentation.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Manuel. I think that was some wonderful insights on new water from Malta. And I think 2 points that you made, one was on the economic considerations, that the inclusion of water reuse in water management frameworks changes the role of traditional water services. I think that really resonated. And the second point that you made on financing models where user tariffs cover part of the operational costs related to reclaimed water production and distribution. I think, thank you so much for your insights. And we now move to Namita Vikas. That's our third and final panelist for this discussion. Thank you so much, Namita, for joining us today. Namita Vikas is the founder and managing partner of Opex ESG LLP and a global board member of the Climate Bonds Initiative of UK. A senior business leader with 3 decades of diverse global experience in climate change strategy and sustainability. She was ranked as one of the leading women in business sustainability by the WBCSD and Sustainability Leader of the Year by Ethical Corporation UK. And she has introduced responsible banking to India. And has raised over 1 billion USD, capital and credit lines towards mainstreaming green finance, and also issued India's first green bond in 2015. She's also one of the architects of the UN Principles for Responsible Banking and served as the chairperson and member of the global advisory bodies like the United Nations Environment Programme, FI, the UNEP FI as we all know it, and some others. Prior to setting up Opex ESG, she served in CXO and management roles with the Yes Bank, Marico and Microsoft Corporation and CII, and is a prominent speaker at the UN General Assembly and G20 on climate risks and sustainable finance. Namita, it's so lovely to have you with us, and thank you once again for joining us. So you've been in this space for so long and have been driving some of these initiatives very passionately. Can you give us a quick overview of the kind of funds that can be accessed for financing in the water sector as a whole, and the work ESG is trying to do to move the needle on this in India before we move to the specific context of today's discussion? Amita?
Thank you so much, Kavita. Thanks a lot, and it's indeed a pleasure to be here. I think these discussions truly provide the impetus to accelerate capital flows towards circular economy objectives. I think the wastewater treatment as a social obligation to protect environment from pollution, outbreak, and waterborne diseases, reducing groundwater depletion has moved to many evolving technologies, and we saw in the earlier presentations, and the growing fairness and acceptability of how reliable sources of non-potable water that address broader issues of water scarcity are useful within cities and rural areas. I think wastewater recycling is a multi-billion-dollar opportunity, especially for India. However, it needs effective participation from governments, financiers, urban local bodies, and small industry. And a participatory approach. We've seen how the renewable energy sector has really bloomed with the kind of participatory approach that was brought about with effective policies and innovative financing mechanisms. So we've seen in the Swachh Bharat Abhiyan, for example, how the Gujarat Technological University and the Baba Atomic Research Center brought in to discuss low-cost indigenous technologies to treat wastewater. And this really built the confidence of private sector players to be able to finance these. We have seen how technologies like Jaldhara technologies, which are today smart and intelligent technologies towards wastewater recycling, which are very cost effective and a very intelligent kind of a plug and play model, which is used to clean, treat and recycle water. What we need is, it will be useful to see such kind of projects coming in and around rural areas for farm use, or in and around ULBs for further usage, from a commercial angle standpoint. Now, what I want to really mention here is that the whole sector, the market globally is about $265 billion in 2018, and slated to double by 2027. And however, there's a financing gap, and it's very important to look at why is there a financing gap. So data shows that water services in general tend to receive a lesser share of federal budgets as compared to hardcore infrastructure sectors. And this accelerates the need to develop alternative financing options. And we've been discussing all of that so many times, right? But when private sector comes into the play, the whole perception of the risks that are there and the risk mitigation mechanisms that are missing becomes extremely critical. In one of the earlier presentations, it was mentioned about how the project's risks are linked to, for example, wastewater quality that is not standard, and that becomes a supply risk. Reuse schemes for treated water are often built very specifically for that purpose, and therefore it all depends on the customer's buying for using it for that specific purpose, which is leads to a demand kind of a risk for the operator or the utility. And financiers look at all of this. Rejection of recycled water for the community owing to lack of awareness, or all mafia vested interests around misinformation adds to the risk basket. And then of course there's huge capex cost, which is upfront, and the sophisticated technologies don't come cheap, and therefore it becomes a financial risk from an overall perspective. Also, project evaluation processes are not standardized. So all this hinders finance from moving towards the kind of opportunity that needs to be leveraged. Now, one of our panelists mentioned about the emerging ways as far as the river basin approach, which uses economic instruments to encourage polluters to reduce their adverse impact. So polluters pay principles are some of the financing models that are emerging, and these are used in developed markets like Germany, France, even Brazil for that matter, where it connects very loosely, but it is the extended producer's responsibility in waste management, and therefore it becomes linked to performance, in a way. So while I can just get into a couple of financing models that are there very quickly. One is, we've seen that federal budgetary allocations and grants towards projects or credit rates by project developers are typically from banks, which are vanilla sources of financing. But lately, the green bond market has picked up very well. Of course, most of the proceeds are going towards renewable energy, but there is a water market that is getting created, and that is from a long-term financing perspective to access capital markets. I think that serves as one of the best opportunities for projects to link up to. So we have in India also, SEBI has guidelines which demands that green bonds are allocated to sustainable water management, right? And IDBI was in fact one of the first issuances which raised over $350 million at a coupon rate of 4.26%. Please note that in 2015, and that included water management. So cost of capital was at that rate from accessing the green bond market. So I think there are PPP models. Vimla mentioned about the hybrid annuity model, and that has become a very important instrument because that is linked to performance. So those are the kind of models that are extremely critical to be used when it comes to financing. I can stop here, and if you have a question, I can take that.
No, absolutely. I think I couldn't agree with you more. So just to build on what you just said, so what do you think are the current financing opportunities available for wastewater treatment in India? And if we have to mainstream, the circularity of treated wastewater for various sectors, especially for agriculture, what innovative mechanisms do you think can be introduced in India?
When you look at overall, decentralized wastewater treatment plants, and that is something which is more acceptable because that's something that's more needed, because large STPs or large kind of plants can't go across India, and we've seen how off-grids or smaller solar solutions have actually provided electricity into those. So I'm just drawing from that, and I think differentiated mechanisms and approaches to channelize capital towards the sector is very, very important. One very interesting example is where companies are using their internal resources to fund such projects. So in 2019, Arvind Mills and Gap, the apparel companies, both together invested in wastewater treatment units at where Arvind's denim factory at Ahmedabad, and this was expected to save 3 billion liters of freshwater usage. In fact, now Arvind operates a subsidiary which is providing solutions to treat water. So it has created a kind of incentivizing. I think somebody's not muted. Huh?
Sorry, someone's not muted.
Yeah. So
one second, we'll just unmute.
This is like created a line of business for, so if Arvind tomorrow takes this to smaller decentralized subcontracting or subcontractors, This is incentivizing commercial businesses to also, fold in with such kind of businesses, and that is scheduled. I mean, that will create more traction. Then we have seen, the Ghaziabad municipality, which issued India's first green municipal bond, raising over 150 crores at a very decent coupon. That is the rate of interest that they had to pay. And the proceeds are going to be partially funding tertiary sewage and sewage and water treatment plants, with an understanding with another industrial association. I think municipal bonds are the next in line, and that needs to be looked at. But one other very important model for such kind of aggregation and securitization is very, very important. So in case of successful solar energy financing, we've seen how financial aggregation and securitization has worked when several small size projects are standardized and bundled, and finance is raised against this pool's future cash flows. So aggregating of small assets that are not large enough to get standalone funding into an asset-backed security, as we call it, asset-backed securitization, really helps the bond markets. You can access the bond markets for long tenor financing, thus matching long-term development projects with institutional investments which have long-dated liabilities. And I think that really that reduces the dependence on short tenors of bank credits. And one other thing that I want to mention here is the blended finance model, which has worked in multiple countries, where a bundling can come from interest subventions, credit enhancements, and some kind of grant facilities to be able to get the whole pieces to fall into place and provide financing to those. There are some very interesting models that are available. I just want to mention about the hybrid annuity model, which is my last thing here. We have seen how large sewage treatment plants, for example, I was involved in a large funding of a 50 MLD STP that was constructed at Varanasi under the hybrid annuity model. And here the whole aspect was the banker signed the deal with an infra company to construct the STP. It was over 20,000 crores kind of a budget. The project was, of course, to not leave any untreated sewage water into the rivers. As per this model, 40% of the capital cost quoted was to be paid on the completion of construction, while remaining 60% of the cost was to be paid over the life of the project as annuities, along with the operations and the maintenance cost expense. The most important feature of this model was that both the annuity and the OEM payments were linked to the performance of the STP, which is one of the biggest challenges for financiers. So such financial structures really ensure the continued performance of assets created due to better accountability, ownership, and optimal performance. Thanks.
Sure. So the ULBs in India have their annual budgets set aside for wastewater treatment, collection, and processing. However, the funds and infrastructure is not adequate. I think Anjali mentioned is 40%, less than 40% of wastewater gets treated in India. Hence, decentralized units having varied capacities based on local conditions would be required. So how could alternative financing or some of the models that you mentioned be made available to technology providers, farmers, or small contractors? And can you suggest a few options to create, say, a conducive environment for decentralized infrastructure?
See, I'll tell you, the challenge with decentralized projects is that the balance sheets of small contractors are unattractive for regular finance, for bank financing, for debt financing, right? And without adequate track record of operations or periodic monitoring reports, financial disclosures in place, financing becomes very difficult. All this is also, all this reduces their credit worthiness. It may be small borrowers or even farmers for that matter. And here I think, the role of ULBs is extremely important to back these kind of decentralized wastewater solution providers. And any financial solution will struggle to generate interest of investors despite the innovation or technologies if the balance sheet is not stable or not attractive. Now, if you look at the revenues and the inflows of the ULBs, these are mainly from tax and non-tax sources, and they are also dependent on devolution or tax grants that are coming from, say, center or the respective states, right? Now, due to poor collection on services or pre-committed commitments of grants or devolutions, this remains a deficit. So converting the grants that centers and states give to ULBs to committed devolutions is likely to allow better leveraging when evaluated and give the confidence to the lenders to fund the project. Secondly, a rigorous and a timely system for accounting of ULBs. So I'm saying how ULBs need to back up with all this is very important. This will lead to greater confidence to the investors in the numbers, identification of new revenue sources, plugging of the leakages of current sources, and improvement of collection, because the financier is looking at the borrower and where the borrower is going to invest that money, right? So naturally, this role of the ULBs becomes very important. I think, Kavita, it's very important to note one data point here. 35 ULBs have been rated AA and above, but only a few have been able to access the market due to the challenges on investor confidence and adequate risk management. So structuring debt requires addressing concerns on availability, predictability, healthy cash flows to meet debt obligations. And while many ULBs have now started escrowing their expected collections of property taxes, for example, to give comfort to investors, I think this needs to become more scalable. These kind of escrow mechanisms need to come in. Hand pooling is also another very interesting model that is emerging, where the ULB resources can reach out to the market to help create, larger issuances. So give investors the comfort of combined credit risk. And this is also seen, like I mentioned, in aggregation and securitization. I think the innovation is to put the pooling in such a way where a variety of state and a municipal bond issuances and create appropriate tranches with suitable risk return, mechanisms built in. So I think that is very important. Then large funds like the Atal Mission for Rejuvenation and Urban Transportation Scheme, which aims to improve infrastructure in 500 cities. These kind of funds are able to create credit guarantee funds or are able to provide risk mitigation mechanisms or tools for wastewater projects or decentralized projects in particular. Then that will work in the interest of creating more and more such projects. I would think since the government of Maharashtra is so much involved in WRG, so involved in this, a task force to particularly look at wastewater financing would be very useful, where there could be methodologies and policies and financing coming together with focus on some of these aspects.
Sure. No, Namita, thank you so much. And I think we're going to take that up on setting up a task force on wastewater financing. I think we have Mr. Bakshi who's listening in, and I'm aware of time. So thank you very much for your very useful and very interesting insights and the data points that you shared. I think some of them I've already made a note of. So thanks very much once again, Namita. And thank you, Vimla, thank you, Manuel and Namita, for such a rich discussion and for sharing your insights on how we can collectively move the needle on financing wastewater reuse projects. I'm aware of time, and we have Mr. Bakshi who's been patiently listening to all our discussions. So I invite him for the closing remarks. I think Mr. Bakshi doesn't need an introduction, but just for the record, he's recently retired as chairman of the Maharashtra Water Resources Regulatory Authority and has provided tremendous individual and institutional leadership to the water sector. We continue to seek his inputs and guidance on many dimensions of wastewater reuse and management. Thank you, sir, for joining us and for this entire series, and for your support and guidance and solidarity. You've been with us in this journey from the beginning to work on this complex but such an important initiative. We would love to hear your reflections and sum up for the key takeaways from both the sessions. Over to you, Mr. Bakshi.
Thank you, Kavita. And thank you for inviting me to the third and final webinar on wastewater reuse in the country, and especially in Maharashtra. You have been doing a lot of work in the wastewater sector, and I think in the last 2.5 years that I have seen you very closely, that wastewater reuse in agriculture sector or in the domestic sector has been a very, very important subject for the 2030 Water Resources Group. Because of the limited time that I have, I was given 15 minutes, but I see that the number of participants is rapidly going down.
Yeah.
It went up to 70 and now it has fallen to 50. So I wouldn't like to hold them up for a longer time. So, but still, I'll mention a few words, or I'll mention a few areas where I will not be able to discuss in detail, but I'll just mention it for the benefit of the audience.
Sure,
what I would like to discuss today is one of those items where I can give some ideas, I can throw some ideas, and it was excellent to hear Namita, where various financing models have been discussed, and she has presented that these are the areas where financing the people working in finance sector are really applying their mind and trying to formalize some of these models. So I'll just mention a few items where I will not be discussing in detail because of the time. First is low priority. I have discussed already. Many of the people presented in today's audience must have heard me in the other webinar also, the low priority in the country. However, I must also say that this low priority is going to be a matter of the past, because the present Prime Minister or Honorable Prime Minister, he has already raised the scale of water sector, field of water, by having a Jal Shakti, Ministry of Jal Shakti. Jal Jeevan Mission has been started. Then, as Bagit said, that the treated wastewater reuse policy of the nation is likely to come out very, very soon. It will be finalized. That will be a real path breaker, and it will show the path to the people for treated wastewater reuse. So that low priority issue I will not be discussing in detail. The second is the ownership issue. I had mentioned it earlier also, and thanks to you, because this ownership issue in case of Maharashtra, I think the 2030 Water Resources Group has thrashed it out, and at the highest level in the state, this ownership issue has been finally handed over to the Urban Development Department. That's a great achievement for the 2030 group, because nobody wanted to own the subject of wastewater reuse and treatment and charging it, managing it. All these ownership issues came up. Then what Anjali mentioned is that because of the absence of differential pricing in fresh water and treated wastewater, the market automatically reduces to very, very small market. And that is because fresh water is available at a very, very low rate. Unfortunately, in the country, Maharashtra is fortunate to actually have started the farmers to pay for agriculture water, but most of the states have not done it, and they do not want to charge the farmers. So that cheap water is one issue which I cannot be discussing in detail. Bankability of the projects, on which FICCI has just started working. FICCI has got a water mission, and they are working on the bankability of projects. That is again a very big subject. It cannot be discussed in such a short time. Then wastewater reuse certificate started by the 2030 Water Resources Group with the water regulator of Maharashtra is in a very, it's in a very good shape, but it has to take off. And unfortunately, because of the disturbances in the government setup and priorities of the government changing during COVID, this has remained where it was. Then absence of regulatory mechanism in all the states is another issue which cannot be discussed in such a short time. And visibility issues. Visibility of water projects is an issue in the country. It's a cultural issue. It's a cultural issue. It cannot happen. As Neve mentioned, that in Israel also it took a lot of time to really push the treated wastewater for agricultural use. And he also gave various models of combining fresh water and treated wastewater as a composite project. That becomes very viable. So now, having mentioned these things, which I will not be discussing, let's come to the issue of viability. And viability is the most important issue today for treated wastewater use. Now, again, viability, I would like to break it up in 2 or 3 parts. One is, let's break it up in 2 parts of CAPEX and OPEX. Now, in CAPEX, the initial investment, let us say the private party is coming out with some preparedness for initial investment. But the loan servicing or the interest servicing portion is very, very huge. So when we talk of viability gap funding, I would request Vimila also to note down this point, because she is in the government and she can really take up such issues in the discussions of the ministry and Jal Jeevan Mission. When a project is conceptualized for drinking water, can it be combined with treated wastewater? That is, only one operator as Neve also mentioned that only one operator takes up the project of supplying fresh water for domestic use and also treating the used water and giving it in the peri-urban areas. So this combination of two different types of water can make the viability slightly better. One. Second, as I said, that viability gap funding, let's break it up again into two parts. One is servicing the loan and finding out the NPV of all the loan interests over the period of 30-40 years, the entire concessionaire period. If the NPV can be found out and this NPV can be given as a viability gap funding, then at least the investor is free of the worries of servicing the loan, right? He brings in capital, he puts it there, but servicing the loan will not be on him because the entire money is coming as a viability gap funding in terms of NPV of the servicing portion of 30-40 years, right? This is one. Coming to Opex. Again, Opex, I would like to break it up into two parts. One, the open market. Open market, that is the farmers who purchase this treated water, they pay something. What do they pay? They pay something as fixed by the regulator wherever the regulator is there. In case there is no regulator, then the department decides as to how much charge the farmer in the peri-urban area should pay. This is one part. Then, will that be sufficient? That may not be sufficient. That may not be sufficient to recover the entire O&M cost. So what happens? Just in case of power plants, when you have power purchase agreements, where it is binding on the state government or the concerned government to buy power at a particular rate, right? I'll go slow. Power purchase agreements are binding on the states, which provide the opportunities for setting up power plants. Similarly, let's have a concept of water purchase agreements. Why I'm saying that is, go back to 10-15 years, Maharashtra 10-15 years back. What was happening? The urban local bodies were asked to treat water as per Supreme Court order, as per High Court order, as per the orders of the state government, treat water and leave it in the riverbed. What was the incentive for the ULB? Nothing. Nothing. They were only told to treat water to a particular standard and leave it in the water in the riverbed. Therefore, polluter pays. Fine. Okay, polluter pays. So the ULB pays because ULB is polluting. So they pay, treat it and leave it in the waterbed, in the riverbed. Once you leave it in the riverbed, it used to become the property of the Water Resources Department again. You get that point? So Water Resources Department is charging you at the time of supply of fresh water, and you means ULB is being forced to treat that water because they have to leave it in the riverbed. Therefore, certain standards have to be maintained. So they put in money, they treat it and leave it in the riverbed. And again, Water Resources Department becomes the owner of it. So if the Water Resources Department has charged you for 100 liters, and you discharge 80, let's say you're doing very good treatment. You are right now, India is doing only 30-35%. And Maharashtra is also doing 30-35%. Let's say you are doing 90%, or let's say just like Israel, you are doing 85% or 90%. Then for 90% treatment and 90% recovered water, the Water Resources Department gets back. So they have given 100 and got back 90 without any cost. Yes?
Yeah. Yes.
Therefore, can we compel them that you buy the water which is not getting sold out in the open market at a minimum support price? Minimum support price is a concept which is very, very familiar to all the audience from India. Minimum support price is generally declared by the Government of India, and Food Corporation of India then implements that minimum support price for making sure that the farmer does not do distress sale. So if the FCI is present, if the Food Corporation of India is present in the market, no trader can buy below the minimum support price. The price is pushed up artificially by the presence of the Food Corporation of India. And therefore the trader, if he wants to live in trading community, if he wants to trade and survive, he has to pay more than the minimum support price. This is the concept of minimum support price for food grains in India. Similarly, you can compel the Water Resources Department that in case the investor is not able to recover the entire money from open market, then you buy the water, treated water, by having that water purchase agreement, and water purchase agreement can be enforced either by the department or by the regulator, wherever the regulator is there. Right? Mahesh will understand. Mahesh will understand very well because he has worked in the electricity sector. He knows that PPAs become an issue for the regulator also. Similarly, water purchase agreements can become an issue of the regulator also. And therefore, the investor is assured of some money from the open market and some support money from the Water Resources Department, because that is the minimum, and that the regulator has fixed or the department has fixed. And therefore, the investor is slightly comfortable. You have taken care of two things. One, whatever capital he brings in, servicing of that capital, the cost of that capital or servicing of that capital is ensured by viability gap funding in the form of NPV of entire 30 years interest. And second thing you have taken care of is that you have provided a market to him in the peri-urban areas of urban local bodies, where farmers, I'll come to that issue, well, the farmers will have to, will be motivated to purchase the treated water because of the differential pricing. And whatever is not getting recovered is coming from the water purchase agreements of the Water Resources Department. The Water Resources Department cannot crib. They cannot say no, because earlier you were getting 90% of the, or let's say 35 to 40% of the recovered water without any cost, and you made your money again. You sold your fresh water, got back the 35% treated water, and again sold that 35%. Therefore, the government at the highest level has to take a decision that water purchase agreements by the Water Resources Department. Why Water Resources Department? Because it is going into the riverbed. What is not being sold to the farmers, is going back to the riverbed. And therefore, riverbed is carrying that water to downstream cities and towns and fields and maybe reservoirs. Therefore, it becomes the property of the Water Resources Department, and therefore, water purchase agreement have to be entered into by the Water Resources. This is the second way of improving the viability. Third is very clearly mentioned by Neve also, that combining fresh water and treated water as a composite project will improve the viability, because drinking water charges from the domestic users is much higher, and there is a mindset of having to pay for drinking water. This mindset is there in the village also, whereas there is no mindset for paying for agricultural water. Therefore, if you combine these two projects, then the viability improves. What is the third way of improving the viability? Just like NMCG, Namita was mentioning that NMCG, or even Navila was mentioning that NMCG has been doing a great work in the area of treatment of water, and they have adopted the cluster approach. Entire city, all ULBs in that city, let's say Kanpur, entire number of all the ULBs combined together goes to one operator. So one city, one operator. Again, it improves the viability, because somewhere you make money, somewhere you lose money. Let's take the example of Nashik. If there are 7 STPs and all are combined and given to one operator, then let us say on one side you will be able to sell it to the grape farmers. On the other side, you may not be able to sell to the grape farmers because they have plenty of water. Downstream of Godavari, what is that dam there in Nashik? Upstream, starting from Bakeshwar. So that side, people may not buy your water because their wells are already charged. but on the other side, they may take. So combination of all the STPs with one operator improves the viability. This is another point that I wanted to tell you. And very rightly mentioned by Dr. Peony that demand assessment has to be done. We are right now talking about modalities of treating wastewater, selling it to the farmers, but do we know the market? Have we assessed the demand? She very rightly said that demand assessment has to be done, and it is a parallel exercise. You don't have to wait for operators to come, establish their STPs, start running. All that is not required. It's a parallel exercise where we can take up some areas and find out at what rate, how much quantity of treated water, who will buy. Three things: at what rate, how much quantity, and who will buy. Zalta is an example.
Yeah.
At what rate you want to buy, how many of you will buy, what quantity you will buy. If you do this market survey in certain patches of Maharashtra, then also you will understand where the viability is better and where the viability is not that good. Understand? Let's say Nashik, let's say Nagpur, where orange is grown in a big this thing, or let us say Pune, a lot of vegetables and lot of other crops require water and they can take from the city area. So these areas, if they are surveyed and demand of treated wastewater is established and the market survey is done, then you are in a much better position to predict the viability of the project. So that is the fourth thing which will improve the viability of the project. And then finally, as I said, cluster approach, and I had mentioned earlier also when I was working in WRRA that cluster approach even for crops. One type of crop or one type of horticulture produce in one cluster. Then your requirement of treating the water to the finest level is not there. The requirement of water for grape, treated water for grape, may be different for pomegranate or guava or orange. You know, you understand, no? Though
yes, sir.
The treatment to a particular standard for a particular grape, for a particular horticulture crop may be different, and therefore you need not treat the water to the best standard. It should only be appropriate to the cluster of grapes, cluster of oranges, cluster of pomegranate, cluster of guava, cluster of anything else. So only for that cluster it should be appropriate. That will take care of the treatment requirement to a great extent, and again the viability will improve because you are not required to treat to the best standard, highest standard. It should be only appropriate to that particular cluster. I think these are some of the issues I wanted to mention, that viability can be increased, and there must be many studious people in the audience who can pick up these ideas, start working on it, make mathematical models, and find out as to what component should be given as viability gap funding from Government of Maharashtra or Government of India, and what component should come from the Water Resources Department as a minimum water purchase agreement, and what component will come from the market which is surveyed by you already and demand has been assessed by you. I think with these few words I will close here, so that in case you have any question we can try to answer that, and thank you again for calling.
Not at all. Not at all. Thank you so much, Mr. Bakshi, for all these comments, especially on your last part on the viability and how we can increase viability of these projects, and for helping us put different elements of this jigsaw together. And I think it's the most inimitable way in which you summarize various insights and different perspectives and bring it all together. I think we will definitely take up this concept of forming a task force for wastewater financing and build in these elements to work on it, connecting both the work that we are doing on the carbon neutral water utilities and then linking that up with wastewater reuse in agriculture. I now invite Ajit Radhakrishnan, who is our Senior Water Resources Specialist and our India Country Coordinator for 2030 WRG, to give his vote of thanks to the entire team and for his closing remarks. Ajit?
Thank you, Kavita. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Yes.
Sure. I think it's a tall ask to follow Mr. Bakshi in terms of summing up and creating sense in terms of what was discussed. But it's always a pleasure to listen to Mr. Bakshi and also the audience that we had and the speakers that we had today. In terms of where we started, I think when wastewater reuse was prioritized back in 2018 as one of the work streams under the multi-stakeholder platform in Maharashtra, and Mr. Bakshi very kindly agreed to lead the work stream as the chairman of the Maharashtra Water Resources Regulatory Authority. We did foresee a lot of opportunities both in the industrial and urban use sectors, but I think the aspect around wastewater reuse in agriculture was kind of slowly emerging because of the numerous policy hurdles and the opportunity and the barriers that were already there. And a lot of gray area, of course, not literally, but then again, with the grey water reuse was also identified, which needed to be tackled. But it seems that with the kind of innovations that are available in countries like Israel and also the experience that Birgit and team had shared from Europe, there are a lot of opportunities in terms of partnership, in terms of collaboration, in terms of improving and maximizing the synergy for action on wastewater reuse in agriculture. So these three-part webinar that we had thus far focused on the technology, the policy and financing, and also the regulatory environment for wastewater reuse in agriculture. Now, having said all these factors are important, but it's also important to bring together the partners onto a table and to create the right ecosystem for implementation of a pilot or further activities in Maharashtra, for which we would need the support of persons or eminent leaders like Viability or, for that matter, even Mr. Bakshi to guide us to take it forward. From that perspective, agri-water reuse is a strong area of opportunity when it combines both climate change mitigation and adaptation outcomes. Also that it would meet the revenue and the fiscal kind of parameters that we just discussed. It also offers enough innovation grounds or landscape, as we would call it, for innovating around financing. Maybe this is where the next generation of innovative financing in water sector would emerge, as Namita rightly pointed out. I think in the subsequent webinars that 2030 WRG would organize with all the stakeholders who are present here and many more to come, we would also focus on the two important other subsectors, which is urban and the industries, who are the big elephants in the room when it comes to implementing policies and also in terms of driving action. So we would need to engage more with the industries and urban sector to understand how we can actually effect wastewater reuse and contribute to the efforts of the government in terms of achieving water security. I would not want to take a lot of time. I know that we are already overshooting the time, but thanks. It was great listening to all the speakers, and thanks for having me as well. Thank you.
Not at all. Thank you, Ajit, and thank you, everyone. And on behalf of 2030 WRG and all of us here, we thank our co-conveners, Sagi, you and your team from the Israel Trade Mission, Birgit, and your entire team from the Indo-EU Water Partnership, GIZ, and the team from WBCSD for their collaboration on this webinar series. And a warm thank you to all our esteemed panelists. And last but not the least, we also thank our audience and partners for attending today's session and this entire series. Thank you very much. We'll be coming up with season 2, like Ajit mentioned, on urban and industrial applications. So watch this space for more. And please take care of yourselves and stay healthy and stay safe. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good night and good day.